In this year of many elections across the world, there are certain contests where the battle between democracy and autocracy have clearly been to the fore. One of those, the most recent to take place, has been Venezuela. And right now, to all appearances, autocracy is fighting to retain control in the face of democratic defeat. The contest was primarily between Socialist President Nicolas Maduro and challenger Edmundo Gonzalez, and the vote took place over a week ago on July 28th. By the way, Gonzalez was only the candidate because the woman who won the primary election for the opposition coalition was unconstitutionally barred from standing. That gives you a few clues right there. Maduro inherited the left-wing populist project from his predecessor Hugo Chavez, and under his rule the country has endured severe economic crisis with massive inflation and food shortages. Many people have flooded out of the country, 7.8 million on the best current estimate, seeking refuge in Colombia, the United States and elsewhere. And a number more are considering their options anew in the light of this outcome. Because it was pretty clear from all of the polling and all of the anecdotal evidence and documentary evidence as well that the opposition had significant, even overwhelming support going into this election. Unsurprisingly, because in any other country that had seen such problems for an extended period, generally the political rules of gravity do kick in eventually. Exit polls and documentation gathered from around 40% of voting centres seem to show the opposition winning 70% of the vote. Not close. For most countries, the very definition of a landslide. But that's not what the official Electoral Council declared. Soon after midnight, it said that Maduro had won with 51.2% of the vote. Now, unsurprisingly, there have been widespread demonstrations since, and the weight of evidence has led a number of foreign states to announce scepticism at best. The United States, for example, has said that it recognises the opposition leader, Edmundo Gonzalez, as the true winner of the election. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said electoral data overwhelmingly demonstrate the will of the Venezuelan people. And he added, in the days since the election, we have consulted widely with partners and allies around the world, and while countries have taken different approaches in responding, none have concluded that Nicolas Maduro received the most votes in this election. Pressure was piled on this weekend when the European Union came to the same conclusion. The European Council issued this statement: copies of the electoral voting records published by the opposition, reviewed by several independent organisations, indicate that Edmundo Gonzalez would appear to be the winner of the presidential elections by a significant majority. The European Union thus calls for further independent verification of the electoral records, if possible, by an internationally reputed entity. That latter is a significant reference. Maduro's claims to have won are not added any veneer credibility, given that the official Electoral Council is controlled by him and has reduced to release in-depth local election data. Other South American governments opposing Maduro are those of Brazil, Colombia and Mexico. They released a statement last week calling for the fundamental principle of popular sovereignty to be respected, and that there should be an impartial verification of the results. Maduro said he would get the Venezuelan High Court to audit the election, which is not a huge reassurance. The court's justices are indeed appointed by and dominated by Maduro supporters. The Carter Center, a pro-democracy group that Maduro's administration had invited to witness the election, also said that the vote could not be considered democratic. Still, on the other side, China and Russia have quickly endorsed Maduro as the winner, so that's some consolation for him, I suppose. China has agreements with Maduro for access to essential resources, including crude oil and minerals, although I expect that's pure coincidence. Meanwhile, Maduro has hit back against protests, labelled his opponents as perverse and macabre terrorists, and said that he is willing to do anything to protect his revolution. He threatened the opposition leader and candidates, saying he held them directly responsible for violence by some of the protesters, and he said the attempt to remove him from power was part of a global extreme right movement involving the presidents of Argentina and El Salvador, Jair Bolsonaro, the Spanish party Vox, and Elon Musk. And indeed, because no event is so serious that we're more than a heartbeat away from stupid these days, Maduro challenged Elon Musk to a fight, and Musk accepted. Which sounds like a bit of fun, but add to it the context that security forces have killed at least 17 people and arrested more than 750 in recent days, according to the New York Times. Perhaps you might conclude there are some circumstances that maybe Elon Musk should not insert himself into. Back to the serious narrative. On the one hand, the fury of Maduro's response suggests a sense of fragility on his part, but on the other, by and large, dictators persist in power so long as they retain the support of the military. And to all appearances right now, Maduro has that relatively secure. He's aimed to do this in the time-honoured autocratic device of dividing the security forces into fragmented units, avoiding any single entity from amassing too much power, using them to keep each other in check. This means, amongst other things, 3 separate intelligence agencies, as well as intelligence units within other armed forces, that keep the opposition and each other in their sights. The author of The Origins of Elected Strongmen, Erica Frantz from Michigan State University, said this: "It checks all the boxes for a regime that should be vulnerable to overthrow. Major economic problems, difficulties with the successor establishing legitimacy, and a narrowing of the support base. The critical player in ensuring the regime stays afloat has been the security apparatus." The security forces would only be likely to switch sides if they became convinced, firstly, there was a possibility that Maduro could be overthrown, and secondly, that such an outcome would be better for them, either because of how they might suffer if they don't and the coup takes place without them, or how they might improve their current lot under a likely new regime. Those sorts of dynamics means that a lot of what really matters in a situation is happening behind closed doors, well out of sight. So how do we think this plays out? It could be that the evidence is so starkly against him that Maduro will find a chain of consequences unfolding that he can't control, and he will end up being replaced. For that to happen, the international community opposition needs to grow even clearer and stronger over the coming days, and the protests closer to home likewise. If the security services see overwhelming international condemnation and see the faces of thousands of their ordinary citizens in the protests, it can influence their perceptions in a way that will ultimately matter. There's a relatively short window for that to happen, though. The alternative, and sadly this is probably, even if quite narrowly, the more likely of the two, is that the protests gradually diminish as people become resigned. More people will leave the country. Maduro will be hampered in his dealings with the international community, but it's not as though he was wildly popular before. And the whole dismal show will limp on, at least until the next crisis, which will come. And dictators eventually fall. Those that are very strongly in control of a machinery that keeps them in place can take longer to do so. But then that is not currently a description of Maduro to all intents and purposes. The time may soon be coming when he will wish that he had quietly acknowledged electoral defeat and handed power over with dignity. But that's exactly the thing. The inability to do that one simple thing is the primary distinguishing feature between the authoritarians and the Democrats, which is what makes it all the more important that those that try to hold on in the face of the wishes of their own people should preferably not be successful at all, but if not that, should always know they have entered a period of extreme vulnerability, that a ticking clock on their administration is now loudly sounding. If we want to promote the value of democracy as a standard for the world, the failure of those who try to subvert the wishes of their population with impunity, that wouldn't be a bad place to start.